A few weeks ago, a really good friend of mine, someone who I really look up to, his name is Drew, he gave me a really phenomenal compliment. He told me that, Sam, I think it's really courageous that you're chasing your dream relentlessly, that you're really going for what you want. And when he said that, I was really tripped up in about a dozen different ways. First of all, I wasn't expecting it at all. And secondly, I didn't know how to respond. As I was trying to formulate my response to that really good compliment, a lot of things went through my mind. And today I want to talk about what went through my mind. So I'm a comedian, as I was introduced. I'm a performer. I have a job that's absolutely perfect for me. I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life. I couldn't imagine something that would make me happier. It wasn't always that way, though. When I was a little boy, I had 3 goals, 3 dreams, 3 things that I had choices of what I wanted to be when I grew up. One of them was a comedian. One of them was a grizzly bear, which is a true story. Funny thing about that is I actually picked grizzly bear because I figured it'd be difficult to be a bear when I grew up, so I might as well pick one that has the same color hair that I have. I was a very pragmatic second grader. And my third option, was to have a big scar through my right eye, which isn't even a thing. Like, that's not even a job. So I had some good options. And I started writing comedy when I was really young. When I was in high school, I wrote a ton of comedy. I never performed it, though, because I was absolutely terrified to. So it was funny, I ended up writing comedy for 4 or 5 years. Nobody ever saw it. It never got out of its notebook. And then finally, I got to the point where I was like, I'm probably never going to do this, because I was absolutely petrified by that fear. And a crush that I had, dared me, essentially, into performing, which I think is how most great things probably happen. Peer pressure from a crush. And I did. I performed. And the first time I did comedy, I fully blacked out. Like, completely blacked out. I don't remember a second of it. All I remember is waking up, and my friends were around me, and they were like, dude, and I go, and they said, you were kind of funny. But that was enough. I was hooked. I absolutely loved it. I did comedy for a couple years straight while I was in school. By the end of my first year doing comedy, I was making money doing it. By the end of my second year, I was getting legitimate shows. I was doing hour-long shows at universities for different events and things. And it was phenomenal. And it got to the point where I started to think, like, could I actually do this? And then I freaked out. Completely freaked out and completely stopped doing comedy. I didn't perform again for years. And I focused on other things that were more responsible, things that were actual, practical, realistic goals. I went to grad school. I went to Bowling Green State University for my master's. You may have heard of it. And while I was in grad school, a similar situation occurred. There was a comedy competition on campus, and a crush dared me to participate. So like all great things in life, I fell victim to the woes of love, and I participated. First time I did comedy in years, and it was phenomenal. I felt the catharsis that I always felt, instant connection, it was amazing, and again, I was hooked. I ended up finishing that competition and doing comedy multiple times a week. By the time I was done with grad school, I was doing comedy 2 or 3 times a week, most weeks, and I still wouldn't acknowledge the fact that I could do that, like that could be my job, because I wouldn't allow myself to, because I'm too smart, or whatever. I'm stupid. But I was getting ready to graduate, and I knew that I would have to do something when I graduated. I wouldn't be in the cradle of higher education any longer. I needed to do something with my life. So I started applying for jobs, realistic jobs that fell in line with my major, with my master's, things that were responsible choices. And luckily, in hindsight, I didn't get any of them. I barely even got interviews, but that's another story. And luckily, the economy was bad. I'm sure you've heard of it. And a lot of people were applying for jobs. Most of the jobs I applied for had at least 200 or 300 other candidates for one position. Those aren't good odds. So I didn't get a job at first, and I started to think maybe I should have a backup plan, because I didn't have one. So I started writing this play, and at the time, it was more of just something to do. It was fun. It was something I wanted to do for fun. It wasn't a real thing. But then after a couple more applications that didn't get responses to, I was like, well, maybe I could do this. So I set myself up a deal. I said, if by X date I don't have a job yet, I'm going to pursue this play. I'm going to produce this play. I'm going to throw myself into it. I'm going to do this regardless of the risks. By X date, I didn't even have close to a job. I didn't even have a lead. And I decided to honor that promise to myself. So I threw myself into my play. I moved to Austin, Texas, which is a phenomenal place to live, and I started realizing what the cost of dreams really were. I shared a 1-bedroom apartment with a roommate. That's nice way of putting it. I rented a corner of a floor of a room, slept on the floor for months, couldn't afford a bed, couldn't afford a futon, couldn't afford anything because every bit of extra money I had, I invested in my play. Every bit of money I could spare that I didn't think was necessary for food or for like my cell phone, things that I absolutely needed for my business, I put into my play, into promotions, into getting stage to rent and perform, anything like that. And it was a really stressful few months. And actually, I mean, it's still a stressful life, to be honest, because there's no guarantee. There's no certainty. And beyond that, I'm risking a lot. I'm sacrificing a lot. But I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life. And I instantly was happier than I ever had been in my entire life just starting doing that. I hadn't even performed my play yet. I actually didn't perform my play for 2.5 months. I was sleeping on a floor for 2.5 months, doing comedy all over the place just to make ends meet. And I finally did my play, and I was like, this is absolutely it. So a lot of people ask me what I do. You know, a lot of people, that's a pretty common question after graduation. And I tell them I'm a comedian, and people are always fascinated by that. But I'm fascinated by people, and they always want to ask me questions. What's your job like? How'd you get into that, et cetera? And I want to ask the same things back, like, what's your job? How'd you get into that? Why do you like it? Why do you love it? But what I've learned over the last few months is that most people don't want to talk about their jobs with me. They want to hear about my job. And that started concerning me. 9 people out of 10 were so disinterested in their own job, they didn't think I could possibly care. So I started doing some research, because I'm a very analytical person by nature. And what I found was something that came as a huge shock to me, but might not come as a shock to you. Most people hate their jobs. I had never known that. I didn't want to know that. That's depressing. That's something I don't want to think about. So I started looking at it. Not only are people unhappy, people are dissatisfied. More than half of people in the United States are dissatisfied with their job. More than half. Only, depending on the research you look at, 5 to 10 to 15% of people say they're happy in their jobs. That's a very small number, and that's really depressing. So I wanted to look into it more, and I was like, well, what makes someone happy in their job? What are the factors that constitute happiness? And there are 3 main factors that make someone happy in their job. The first one's really obvious. Do you like what you do? Do you love going to work? Do you enjoy your job? That's the most important thing. Second is salary. Do you feel you're being paid fairly and compensated fairly for what you're doing? And the third one is worth. Do you feel that your job is worth something? Do you feel that you're contributing through your job? Those are the 3 most important things in job happiness. So I started thinking about those 3 things, and I started thinking about how most people aren't even satisfied, let alone not happy with their jobs. So most people don't feel excited about their job, not happy to go there. They don't feel they're being compensated fairly, and they don't think that they're contributing anything to their job. And that made me even more depressed, so I dug deeper. And I looked into it even more, and I thought about salary, and I was like, well, you know, I'm basically absolutely incomeless. Like, I'm not making any money at all, and I'm happy. Like, I wonder what the correlation is between happiness and salary. Can you buy happiness, right? And you can, is what I learned. But only to an extent. There's a really strong positive correlation between happiness and salary up to $40,000 a year. And then after that, the correlation goes away and the relationship is non-existent. So basically, up until $40,000 a year, the more you make, the more likely you are to be happy with the rest of your life. But after $40,000 a year, it's negligible. If you're not enjoying your job, and if you don't feel like your job is worthwhile and you're contributing, then the extra $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year means nothing. And that fascinated me. And I started thinking about this, and I was like, but I'm still missing the root of what I was really interested in, this idea of dreams, this idea of what is your dream? What is your dream job? Because I'm doing that. And I wanted to know who else was. And I couldn't find that much research, so I did my own. And I asked 1,000 people, ages 24 to 38, a few simple questions. And when I talk about dream jobs, I want to clarify that I'm not talking about your childhood aspirations. I'm not talking about if you want to be like a cowboy or a grizzly bear like I did, or an astronaut, but you can't because they've been defunded. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about in a dream job is based on that same premise, though. When you're a kid, you don't think about anything in the world when you make decisions but yourself. When I wanted to be a grizzly bear, when I grew up, I wanted to be a grizzly bear because I wanted to be a grizzly bear, and I was weird. Like, that's it. That's the only reason why. I didn't care what my parents thought. I didn't care what my family, brother or sisters, what my uncles and aunts, what my teachers. I didn't care that it wasn't possible. That's what I wanted to be. It didn't matter that there wasn't financial stability in grizzly bearhood. There's not that much room for advancement. The market can't bear the weight of more grizzly bears. That didn't matter. I never thought about that stuff. I was like, that's what I'm going to be. And here's the weird part. I wanted to be a mama grizzly, so that's just a whole nother, oh yeah, that's a lot of baggage. But anyway, that's what I want. That's what I asked people. I said, without taking any inputs into consideration, without thinking about any of the factors that would affect your decision of what you'd want to do. So no money, not your friends, your family, society, what's realistic, what's safe, what's an actual potential job, none of that. What do you want to do with your life? That's your dream job. What would you do if none of those things mattered? That's your dream job. So I asked these people, 1,000 people, 24 to 38, and as you can probably tell from the tone of this oddly depressing comedian's speech, the responses weren't very happy. Of the 1,000 respondents, 7%, just 7%, said that they were either currently in a job they would describe to fit that category of their dream job, or they thought that they had the potential, they were on track to eventually be in that job. 7%. The other 93% either weren't in their dream job, or in a job that they describe in that way, or over 60% said that that wasn't even an option. It wasn't going to happen in the future. It wasn't on their plan. It just was out of the question. And that was miserable for me to think about that. But then I thought more, like I couldn't stop thinking about this. So then I thought, I thought the cost of dreams was all that, like sleeping on the floor and eating garbage food and riding the bus with scary people. But I started thinking about it from completely the other angle. This concept of what's the cost of not chasing your dreams? What's the impact that all of these statistics I've just spouted out to you, what's the impact that those have on these people's lives? And it's a very severe impact, as you can imagine. The number one cause of premature death in the United States is heart-related. One of the major contributing factors to heart disease and heart-related incidences is stress. And the number one source of stress is occupational. These people who are having these terrible jobs, or even just jobs where they're satisfied but not happy, they're bringing all that stress back home. And here's the oddest thing. The two major things that contribute to happiness in your life, the two biggest, most important things, one, relationships, specifically monogamous, like intimate relationships. Are you having sex? Really? Okay. So number two. Okay, so number two is your job. And the oddest thing about that is, like, if you have a really healthy relationship, you're likely to be happy. But if you have a bad job, you're not likely to have a healthy relationship. If you're unhappy at work, you're going to be unhappy at home. So that's even more powerful to think about how depressing all of this is. So getting back to the question that my friend asked me, or not the question, getting back to the compliment that my friend Drew gave me, it staggered me when he said that he appreciated the courage it took for me to chase my dreams and for me to do what I'm doing. And like I said, all these things I just said instantly flashed through my mind, because over the last few months, that's what I've been spending my free time doing, is figuring out all these things. And when he said courage, it was the first time that anybody had ever said that to me. Most people were like, yeah, it's so cool, or come to my birthday party. No one says that. And I thought about that, and I said, you know what, Drew, I really appreciate that. That's a really sweet thing to say. But I have to correct you. I don't honestly believe that it takes courage to do what I do, based on what I've learned and based on my experience, based on the research that I've found, the research I've done, and based on these really troubling statistics related to health. It's the exact opposite of that. I'm not chasing my dreams because I'm courageous. I'm chasing my dreams because I'm terrified. I'm terrified of not chasing my dreams. I don't want to die. I want to live. Thank you.